Hello everyone, and it is that time yet again to talk about my favourite movies from this past year. And I've got to be honest, 2019 was overall a pretty decent year for movies. The first half of the year was met with a lot of shit and meh films, but the back end of the year happened, and it was just this landslide of absolutely awesome movies that just kind of came out of nowhere for some reason, and I loved every single minute of it. And overall, I do think we got some really great movies that I'm happy to talk about in this video. Now, like every year, there are a few things I have to run through before I get into the actual list itself. The first thing being that this list is my own personal opinion, so if there is a movie that you think should be on this list that isn't, then I'm sorry. This list is my own personal opinion, and it may not necessarily agree with yours. The second thing is that I did not see every movie that was released in 2019, and that is for a few different reasons. First of all, there are some movies that I really wanted to see but unfortunately couldn't. One specifically that comes to mind is The Farewell. I really wanted to see that movie, but I just didn't have the time or, accessibility to get to see it. That being said though, because I live in the UK, there are other reasons why I don't see certain films. Like, there is a movie that I would love to put on this list, which is Parasite, but it doesn't come out in the UK until February 2020, and I haven't seen it yet because of that very reason. So there are some movies that I just couldn't see, and there are some movies that aren't even out in the UK yet. So that is the reason why certain films like the two that I mentioned won't be on this list. Also, my initial rating of a movie doesn't necessarily correspond with where it will be placed on this list. This is my one time every year to be brutally honest and kind of say to you guys, right, these are the movies that I enjoyed in this specific order. A movie that I gave a 10 out of 10 to may not be as, say, rewatchable or entertaining as I found a certain movie that I maybe gave a 9 or an 8 to. So I just want you to take that into account before I get into my list. Also, like every year, there are a couple of honourable mentions I have to mention that unfortunately didn't make the final list. And this year it's a real shame because these movies are still absolutely fantastic, but unfortunately they just barely missed out on being in the top 10, and those movies are Ford v Ferrari, Booksmart, Toy Story 4, John Wick Chapter 3 Parabellum, and El Camino. So, with all that out of the way, let's get into my list with number 10. Rocketman for me was one of the biggest surprises of the year. I didn't intend to enjoy it as much as I did, but this movie ended up being a ton of fun from start to finish, and did a really good job of showing you what Elton John's life was like in the spotlight, but also outside of that as well, whilst also being a very entertaining musical as well. And the fact that it didn't take itself that seriously worked in its favour. I felt like if it took itself a bit too seriously, say like Bohemian Rhapsody did, I don't think the whole message of what the movie was going for would maybe come across that well. But this movie didn't take itself that seriously. It was over the top and a ton of fun, just like Elton John can be himself when he's on stage, and I loved every single minute of it. And also, this is a career best performance from Taron Egerton. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood may not be Tarantino's best movie, but I still had a ton of fun watching it, and it is one of those movies that gets substantially better with each rewatch. I saw it twice in the cinema, and I have to say, it was miles better the second time than it was the first time. The first time I saw it, I thought it was pretty good, but I thought it had quite a few pacing issues and some editing problems. But watching it a second time, it definitely flows a lot better, and there are a lot more subtle things you pick up on the second time that do add to the overall experience and story of the movie. And I can't wait to watch it many more times. Like I said, this isn't necessarily Tarantino's best movie, but in terms of pure enjoyment and rewatchability, I think this is up there with one of his best in that regard. The Nightingale just proves that Jennifer Kent is one of the most interesting directors to watch today. If The Babadook wasn't anything to go by, then The Nightingale surely just cements that. I really enjoyed The Nightingale. Well, I suppose enjoyed isn't the right word, considering how fucked up this movie can get. But it is still a very entertaining watch. You really care for this character as she goes through pretty much hell and back just to get revenge. And even by the end of the movie, you're just kind of thinking to yourself, was that revenge even worth it in the end? And it has a lot to say about society, Australia as a country and its history, as well as a lot of race things as well. And I really did like this movie a whole lot more than I was expecting to. And I do feel it's a movie that not enough people have seen. I've heard quite a few people talk about it, but not enough people have actually gone ahead and seen it. And I highly recommend you do go out of your way and watch this movie because it is absolutely brilliant and you get a ton of fantastic performances, specifically from Sam Claflin, who gives, again, a career best performance here. I knew I had to put Avengers Endgame on this list somewhere, purely for its epic scale alone. Even though it is one of those movies where the more I think about it and the more I watch it, the more noticeable its issues become. But that being said, you can't deny how simply enjoyable this movie is. Yes, it has a lot of issues and a lot of faults, but what it's trying to achieve, which is this book-ending chapter in this story that's been lasting almost 10 years, you really have to applaud it for how concise it is able to do that. I do think Infinity War is the better movie because it kind of nails the pacing, flow, and just the overall grasp of handling all these characters at once a lot better than Endgame does. But that being said, Endgame makes up for what it doesn't have compared to Infinity War. It makes up for in the sense of epic scale, especially with that final 20-minute, 30-minute battle scene, which is just still mind-blowing to think of to this day. And yeah, I kind of had to include Avengers Endgame on this list purely for what it was able to accomplish. And also the fact that it was able to get really good performances out of everyone is, again, something really impressive considering how many people are in this movie. Right from the start of this movie, you can tell that The Irishman is a passion project from Martin Scorsese. Every single bit of this movie feels warranted, and you can tell he's put his heart and soul into every single aspect of this movie. Personally, I don't think it's as rewatchable or maybe as entertaining as something like The Departed or The Wolf of Wall Street. But The Irishman, to be honest, is a completely different beast in that sense. It's not going for pure entertainment or, you know, those kind of things that those other movies are brilliant at. What it instead is doing is delivering you a pretty standard gangster movie, but with a lot more subtext than you're used to. Enough to make you start thinking about these characters, and even stuff that kind of makes you think about yourself and where you're going to end up in several years' time. I thought this was a fantastic movie with fantastic performances from literally everyone in the movie. And yeah, Scorsese still has it, and The Irishman is one of his most personal movies to date, and it really shows. Marriage Story is one of the most realistic depictions of marriage and divorce that I've ever seen in a movie. And I know that might not sound like a selling point to some of you, but trust me, it is worth it with this movie because you are getting some fantastic lead performances from Scarlett Johansson and Adam Driver, as well as a script and direction that just feels very human and natural. Everything about this movie feels like you're watching actual people and events taking place. None of it feels over the top or Hollywoodized. It feels very genuine, very nuanced, and I loved almost every single thing about this movie. From the really heartfelt montage that opens the movie to that iconic scene that you've seen memed a ton of times on Twitter already. This is a really good movie that I implore a lot of you to go and watch. Even if that one scene in particular may have put you off, I still recommend you at least give it a chance. It's on Netflix. So yeah, definitely give this one a shout. Even if it might not sound like your cup of tea, it definitely is worth it. Not alone for the acting, but for other reasons as well. I fucking love Joker. I don't care what anyone says about it, I really, really love the movie. What it is able to say about society, and the things that this character has to go through, I really thought were very hard-hitting. Never felt like it was forcing it down your throat, and instead felt like it was only there for the sake of the story to work, and I really did appreciate that. Joaquin Phoenix is absolutely brilliant. Todd Phillips' direction was actually really good, considering that I've only really seen The Hangover, which is the only other movie that he's really notable for. And yeah, everyone really did their best on this movie, and it's one of those movies where I feel like as it goes on, it just gets more insane and more intense, to the point where you get to the last 15 to 10 minutes that genuinely blew my mind. And I tell you what, if I was to rewatch those last 10 minutes, my jaw would probably still be on the floor like it was the first time, because I still don't know what to think about those last 10 minutes. They're just so intense and in your face that it's a lot to take in, basically. Also, I do have a slight thing I want to bring up here, is that people that are comparing it to Taxi Driver and calling that alone a criticism of the movie, I feel isn't that warranted. Purely for one specific reason. There is a movie that came out last year or the year before called You Were Never Really Here that I did review on this channel, and looking back at it, that movie has a lot more in comparison with Taxi Driver. If you think about it, the plot and central themes of You Were Never Really Here is almost identical to Taxi Driver. But for some reason, no one has a problem with that movie copying Taxi Driver, but as soon as Joker does it, everyone has a problem. And if anything, I think Joker does enough of its own unique thing to make it feel like its own thing, if that makes any sense. I feel like it does enough unique stuff to feel like its own unique experience. Jojo Rabbit might just be the sweetest, most charming movie I've seen all year. And that's saying something, considering it's about Nazis. Honestly though, what Taika Waititi was able to accomplish with this movie is genuinely brilliant. I loved every single minute of it. It's absolutely hilarious. It is really heartwarming at times, but that being said, when it needs to go for an emotional punch, it absolutely nails that aspect as well, and I loved every aspect of this movie. The soundtrack and score by Michael Giacchino, as well as pre-existing songs as well, is also brilliantly used in this movie. If you haven't seen Jojo Rabbit, highly recommend it. But yes, it is definitely one of my favourite movies of the year. It's number 3 for crying out loud, and I do think this is up there as one of Taika Waititi's best. I do still think What We Do in the Shadows is his best movie, but Jojo Rabbit is a very close second. The Lighthouse is one of those movies where the more I think about it, the better it gets. When you see it for the first time, you're too busy going, what the fuck am I watching, to fully take anything in. But the more you think about it, and the more time you let pass after you've seen it, the more it works on you. And this ended up being one of my favourite movies of the year, purely because of how invested I was in the movie as I was watching it, but also how mentally engaging it is for days after you've seen it. This movie definitely has some career best performances from Willem Dafoe and Robert Pattinson, who, like I said in my review, feel like they're in a competition trying to outact each other, but it never feels weird or out of place. It feels like it's there for the sake of the movie, and it's just a ton of fun to watch on the screen. Well, I suppose fun isn't the right word, it's just incredibly interesting to watch unfold, as these two men get progressively more insane, and you just lap up every single minute of it. I know there are some people that have seen it that I've talked to that it didn't particularly click with them, and that's fair enough, but I loved every minute of it. That's right, my favourite movie of 2019 is Rian Johnson's Knives Out. I've never had so much fun this year with a movie as I did with Knives Out. Knives Out is just a blast from start to finish, and I had to put it at number one purely for how flat out entertaining this movie was. It nails the whodunit murder mystery aspect of it with a script that keeps twisting and turning God knows how many times that you genuinely don't know where it's going to go. There is direction and cinematography that focuses on very minor details that help you figure out where things might go, and by the time the end of the movie comes around, a lot of those minor details, or even throwaway lines, end up playing a very big part later on in the movie, and I love that aspect to it. But also, the cast as well look like they're having just a ton of fun in this movie, specifically Daniel Craig and Chris Evans, who are just eating up every single minute there on screen. This movie is absolutely brilliant. I love this movie, and if you see it with the right audience in a cinema, then it just kind of enhances the experience that whole much more, just because it's a fun movie, and if you watch it with the right crowd, it can just make it a lot more fun because you're getting the right responses at the right time. And I got that when I saw it at the London Film Festival. So guys, those are my favourite movies of 2019. I'll be very interested to hear what some of your favourites are in the comments below. And also, I will be doing a best of the decade list in early January. Well, I'll try to get it out in early January anyway. It will be a top 100 movies that will be split into two different videos, a part 1 and a part 2. Part 1 will cover 100 to 51, and part 2 will cover 50 to 1. I've been working on that video for a few months now, and I will try my best to get it out. If I don't get it out in early January, then I'll try and make sure it's out at some point in January. So I hope you guys look forward to that. Thank you for another fantastic year, and especially getting me to 300 subscribers. That was fantastic. And yeah, I look forward to seeing what we are able to do with this channel next year and in the years onward. If you enjoyed the video, then give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Bye.